Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Wednesday, September 30th, 2020, 10 a.m. Central, in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Wednesday, of course, is Campaign Discussion Day. We often focus on my own long running series of Grimwald, setting rather. Started in 1974 with a little dungeon in a town nearby, as so many settings did back then. But it grew over the years, and there's a lot to it now. Not something I ever have any intention of releasing. I think for a single individual to release a full blown setting is a lot of friggin' work, and I just don't. I really don't want to work that hard. I never have thought I might release it. I've always thought, well, it'll be bits and pieces, right? When I released the Whispering Woodwind, it had some chunks of my Grimwald setting within it, and that's all good. One of the problems, though, of course, is you start seeing other things online with suspiciously close names. And that can be tough because you think, man, did they hear my name? Is it just one of those things where it's not really that weird that two people could come up with something that similar on their own? So, there you go. That's how it goes. At least I've got some precedent, some proof, whatever, of having been using this for a long time. So can't really blame me if I keep using it. Anywho, today we're talking about. Oh, I thought I'd take a look at the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide and take a look at secondary skills, and then maybe roll into social class and rank in another section, which is actually cited at the end of the secondary skills section as something else that should be looked at. So it just seems natural to roll right into the other. I'm fairly certain this is going to be a 2, maybe 3. Good morning, George. How you doing? This may be a 2 or 3 day, 3 week, 3 show campaign discussion. So we'll jump on in. We'll see how it goes. We'll move it along. We'll talk more about it as we go, whether we'll stretch it or make it more. Anywho, to dive right in, secondary skills table. Player character non-professional skills. That's really where we're starting here, because we go back to other character stuff, but we're going to start here because this is the section we want to focus on. So I'm going to pop this up with a 260% look-see. When a player character selects a class, this profession is assumed to be that which the character has been following previously, virtually to the exclusion of all other activities. Thus, the particular individual is at first level of ability. However, some minor knowledge of certain mundane skills might belong to the player character. Information and training from early years or incidentally picked up while the individual was in apprenticeship learning his or her primary professional skills of clericism, fighting, etc. If your particular campaign is aimed at a level of play where secondary skills can be taken into account, then use the table below to assign them to player characters or even to henchmen if you so desire. Yet I don't do enough of that. That's an interesting point. It kind of gives henchmen a little extra depth just to simply say, thanks for hiring me. I was so tired of working as a teamster. constantly taking those wagons back and forth to that same old town on that same old route, having to deal with the tolls and the taxes and all the other stuff. And I'm just glad to be out carrying a torch for you. Just so happy. Just, just to weigh in, right? To make an NPC, a henchman, or even a hireling a little more interesting. Could be fun. So I think from now on, if I remember, anytime I have any henchmen involved in a campaign, I'm going to remember to try to remember to pop over to the secondary skills table and give it a quick roll for each one. You know. Oh, it's Frank the farmer, former farmer. I carry a spear now behind my friend Dirk the Daring. Assign a skill randomly or select according to the background of your campaign. To determine if a second skill is known, roll on a table, and if the dice indicate a result of 2 skills, then assign a second appropriate one. So yeah, I'll use this table at the beginning of new campaigns. I think the main thing it does when you spend time is it gets people in the mode of kind of a call and response, um, asking each player as you go around to roll percentage dice, and then having a look at the table, and then either reading out what it says or describing where they come from with an emphasis on describing like the port town that so and so comes from, because they have a background as a navigator, and they used to help explore the coastline further to the south from this town, as they were commissioned to look for new fishing grounds, but to make them safer by marking off where there are shoals or where there are rocks just beneath the surface to make things safer. So, there are all different ways to take any one of these and expand upon it in the moment, while taking into account the character and the setting, and combining it all into a quick narrative description to help flesh out the background of a player character. But we look at the rolls now. We got 2, 4. Ooh, we got a big jump, right? 6 extra percentage points there for farmer gardener, so they expect that to be fairly frequent. Just 4 there, but twice as many as armorer, right? For fisher, netting, could be that type of fisher, right? We've got 6 again for forester, only 3 for gambler, but that's more than armorer. Let's keep the whole table on here so we can jump back and forth on the numbers and take a look at them comparatively. 3 for gambler. We got 4 for hunter fisher, hook and line fisher, rather than netting fisher. Interesting that they separate it that way rather than have the 2 types of fishers together. Just noticing that. I don't know if it's a big deal. We've got 5 points for husbandman, animal husbandry, someone who takes care of animals and knows how to raise them and perhaps domesticate them. Just 2 points for jewelry and lapidary, jeweler. We got 3 more for leather worker, tanner. We've got limner and painter, just 2. Again, 3 for mason carpenter, just 2 for miner. Now, some of these percentages, I should point out, are worth looking at in regard to your setting and what is in your setting. If you are not right near some kind of body of water, maybe fishing is not going to be as regular a thing. If you're near mountains, you might want to increase the number of times that miner should come up. For instance, you might just flat out say, okay, roll the dice. Gambler, there's no gambling, or I don't want somebody to have that sort of background starting off. If they want to get into it later, that's their thing. Or you might say shipwrights. There are no sailors, not really a thing near this mountain fortress town. So if I roll any sailors, they're just by default going to be a miner. If I roll no skill immeasurable worth, they'll be a miner's apprentice, somebody who's learning the craft, the field, the skill of mining, or working alongside the miners, just moving buckets of water or pushing ore carts, something less skilled but tied to mining. Roll twice, ignoring the result. This result hereafter. Well, maybe you do roll a second time, but the first one's automatically minor. So we include minor as one of two anytime there are going to be two in this area where there are just so many minors. It's almost impossible that you didn't become one when you were growing up, because 75% of the people that are in this community are tied to mining in one way or another. So it's worth keeping the setting in mind when you're rolling these up and defaulting to certain particular secondary skills that would be most prevalent in that area of the setting. Anywho, there you go. When secondary skills are used, it's up to the DM to create and or adjudicate situations in which these skills are used or useful to the player character. Mining, you probably know a few things that are very useful if you're down in the dungeons, right? As a general rule, having a skill will give the character the ability to determine the general worth and soundness of an item, the ability to find food, soundness of an item. All right, let's stick with our mining example. You pick up a pickaxe, and you're somebody who spots that there's a crack in the handle, because you've seen that before. And not only have you seen it before, you remember it because you've seen what happened when you strike with a cracked handle and that pickaxe head goes flying into someone's noggin. So, things like that are things you would notice that aren't maybe directly about mining, but are related. The ability to determine the general worth and soundness of an item, as I just said. The ability to find food. Maybe not so. Make small repairs. Okay, change an axe handle. I think that's something that's probably in your skill set. Or actually construct crude items. Okay, well, we don't have a spare handle, but I can cut down a small sapling, small tree, and strip the bark off of it and shave down one end and make a decent enough replacement handle that I can then use that tool and or weapon. Put that in the skill set, right? Let's see, crude items. For example, an individual with armor skill could tell the quality of normal armor, repair chain links, and perhaps fashion certain weapons. To determine the extent of knowledge in question, simply assume the role of one of these skills, one that you know a little about, and determine what could be done with this knowledge. Use this as a scale to weigh the relative ability of characters with secondary skills. And there is where it says right there, see also the campaign, social class, and rank in AD&D, which is kind of the second half of what we'll be doing here. Maybe the second 2/3 or 3/4, because that's a much bigger section. But let me address also, I'm a big fan of using ability scores to determine success in situations where there isn't some other mechanic already handling it. Obviously, saving throws are saving throws, and survival, resurrection, res rolls, have their own role, and you don't need to bring in a ability score roll for that. But if you're doing something like this and using secondary skills and maybe allowing it to expand into a sort of a proto skill system, You don't have to go all the way in it. You can just say that certain things are mundane enough that with enough time, and you can determine how much time, somebody could change an axe handle, for instance. It's not something that needs to be rolled for. It just needs to be something that uh, requires a certain amount of time and the will to do it, and the resources to do it. So if you can cut down a small tree and you've got a knife and you can whittle it down to make a crude axe handle, then you can replace the broken one that you have in, I don't know, let's say an hour, 2 hours, something like that. Um, if they say they want to rush through something like that, you can certainly bring an ability score into it. Um, in that case, you got to determine which ability score. I would say in most cases where there's some thought involved in what you're doing, you're probably not going to try to bring strength to bear or dexterity or wisdom, charisma or constitution, but it'll come down to intelligence. And here's an area where if somebody's been using intelligence as a dump stat because they figure I'm just going to play my character and I'm smart, so no matter what my intelligence is on paper, look what I'm bringing to the table. And some players will act like that. Then, then this is where they get that comeuppance, right? Because if they've got a 6 intelligence and now things they want to do rely on them having some intelligence and they're rolling against it, rolling a 30% chance of doing something, that'll be a bit of an eye opener. But like I say, for most of these things, if you have the skill and the time and the resources, then these are things you don't need to roll for. You maybe need to discuss it for a moment and move on, and don't spend too much time on it either. Don't take a lot of table time up when you've got 3, 4, 5, 8 other players sitting around your table, and somebody is talking about using their secondary skills, and they want to get into this sort of role playing minutia. Um, it's one thing to say, um, I'm a gardener and I want to be able to identify this plant. Okay, it's a pretty common plant. This is what it is. You just know this. Or it's kind of a rare plant. Roll against your intelligence. Roll your intelligence or below on a 20-sider, and we'll see if this is in your field of knowledge. Or maybe because it's unusual enough and kind of special, you want to roll as a DM behind the screen because you need to modify it in some way. Say they are essentially allowed a roll against half their intelligence, or uh, roll and add 5 because it's difficult to know, so it's less chance of rolling your intelligence or below. So these modifiers may not be apparent to the player, so you may need to roll these in secret. So this is why I often say a lot of skill checks or for thieves and stuff like that should be done by the DM behind the screen. Because if there are modifiers, the player and even the character might not be aware of those modifiers being in play. So the difficulty of that particular task may be greater, but they may not be aware that they're greater. It's that player character Dunning Kruger effect, right? They totally believe they should be able to climb that wall. The fact that it's a little moist or that it's crumbly or whatever is not apparent until they begin the climb. Rubber to the road, as it were. But same thing with secondary skills. Um, they may not be aware that their environment that they're in is different. So they grew up and were in a mining town and were a miner before becoming a fighter. Now they're in a dungeon in another part of the world with a group going through tunnels, and they have some idea of what they're dealing with, right? And that's all good, and they should be able to say, If there's some beams supporting a roof here or there, a ceiling rather, um, they should be able to maybe determine the age of those beams, how long they've been in place, how useful they actually are, where they are. Um, it may be a sign if they're spaced more frequently, um, more closely together. That may tip somebody off that this is a more dangerous area of a higher chance of collapse. Um, so somebody who's a miner might think of that when they see that. Well, somebody who has no background in that, they don't even realize it. They don't even think about it. It's not in their thought process. So it's worth thinking about that in that regard. But also, I want to say that if they are in a whole other part of the world and there are different stone formations that they're not familiar with from their minds back home, this can throw off their ability to bring their knowledge to bear. If they're beneath a volcano, for instance, there's a whole different type of stone structure here, and it may not be something they can deal with, or you may want to just apply some modifiers to the roll. Maybe they can figure it out. Maybe they've worked with somebody in the past at those mines back home that was from a different place altogether that knew this sort of stuff. And in some conversation over lunch, they're sitting down having a loaf of bread and some cheese for their midday break, and this came up in conversation. And there are ways of when they make that roll and they get that unusual knowledge that you can say, here's how you would have picked it up. Here's how you would know this, And again, this is one of those things where DMs often fall into the trap of I'm just going to say no. And sometimes you have to. And this always say yes thing doesn't fly with me. Just not the case. But it's more fun for the players. No, it's not really. It's just giving them everything. That's not fun. It's not fun to just be handed everything. So don't fall into that trap either. But don't fall in the trap of reflexively saying no when the dice tell you yes. If the dice say yes and you can't immediately think of something, think a little harder of a reason. It's like when somebody plays a character and they say, well, my character would do this. No. You can do what you want to do, and that's what your character does. And then you come up with a reason why you've done something that you don't think you would normally do. Don't play it the other way. Don't let your preconceptions of who your character is be a straitjacket on your play. Rather, let the dice roll, let the randomness, let the situation inform your play, and then create your character based on what's happening and what you're choosing to do, not the other way around. That's how you role play. Anywho, that's my 2 cents on that. So it says, see also campaign social class and rank in AD&D. Well, I can tell you that is on this other page. So we're going to pop over here. I think it's down this way. Setting things in motion. This is all very exciting. What is that page at? 88? I think it's on page 88. Typical inhabitants, social class and rank in advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We're just barely going to scratch the surface in here, and we're going to have to leave most of this till next time. But let's have a quick look at it. That way I don't have to change the show title. We're still doing this part, at least in part. There is no random table for determination of character social status to be found here. If you're looking for a die roll, tough toenails. That is because the inclusion of such a factor will either tell you little or nothing of useful nature, or it will abridge your freedom with respect to development of your campaign milieu. one of our favorite words, especially over at Questing Beast. That is, if such a table tells you only a little so as not to force a social structure upon your campaign, the table can contain nothing of use. If it states rank, it presupposes you will, in fact, have such classes in your campaign when you might not desire them at all. There are dozens of possible government forms, each of which will have varying social classes, ranks, and castes. Which sort you choose for your milieu is strictly your own prerogative. While this game is loosely based on feudal European technology, history, and myth, it also contains elements from the ancient period, parts of more modern myth, and the mythos of many authors as well. Within its boundaries, all sorts of societies and cultures can exist, and there is nothing to dictate that their needs be feudal European. Gets into some details from the dragon, which is neat because the DMG doesn't really stand alone. It calls out some other TSR products as inspirational or of note or holding some information that they've used as a background for the information they're putting here. And I think that's great. We will recap this opening section next time when we get back to this in a sort of a part 2. I see by the clock on the wall we're just about there. Hey, Henry Armitage, how you doing? As an adult, says Henry, it is fascinating to read the old DMG and think about the evolution of D&D from a very simple game to something very rich. Yeah, agreed. Love the dragon reference with the month and year. Yeah, George, no doubt. Nice that they throw that in and let you know if you are somebody who has all that material where you can double check to read more and figure out where they're coming from contextually as they write this next section. Gary in particular, obviously. Hey, I want to say thank you to everybody who has come by today. Thank you for jumping in to follow the channel if you are here. Good idea, and absolutely do chime in on the chat stream when you're here, because we keep a little list of folks that have been following the channel. I got Henry and Luxfire on there already, so you're all set. I also want to say, don't forget the schedule, 10 a.m. now. Every day, 10 a.m. is when we start, so do yourself a favor and pop on in just before. Tomorrow, GMing tips. We'll be doing building adventures on Friday. That will be the first show of the 3 shows we're doing with Virtual Greyhawk Con. So come join us for that. GM reviews on Saturday. We'll do that. And the Sunday Rules Retrospective show as part of Virtual Greyhawk Con as well. Back around to weekly news and announcements on Monday, cartography and world building on Tuesday, and campaign discussion again next week, where we'll pick up on the social order section of the DMG. Discuss what's useful for us, and where we might expand on it, and any number of other things. If you're catching up with this on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit the old subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. And by all means, if you have some constructive criticism, add it into the comments section. We can always make the show better, and we appreciate any help along those lines. Thanks again, everybody. Do appreciate it. Here at the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And bye-bye.